Today, I'm going to tell you why speeding can completely trash your holiday travel budget. By the end of today's episode, you're going to understand how to optimize your travel expenses so that you can minimize the impact on your wallet when it comes to driving specifically. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled financial coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. To get things started, I want to tell you about the time I helped my brother Jordan get his Honda Ridgeline that he bought off an auction to a mechanic who was a friend but a good ways away. And this ties right into my discovery of how speeding can kill your travel budget. We needed to drive this Honda Ridgeline a good ways away. Now, as far as pickup trucks go, I think it was a good practical purchase for him, just by the nature of it being a smaller truck. Some of my friends who are more serious about pickup trucks wouldn't call the Honda Ridgeline a truck, though. They call it an SUV with a birth defect, but that's completely beside the point. My brother was happy with his purchase. But the brakes needed a lot of work, among some other things. It was an auction purchase, and just like many, it needed some serious attention from a qualified mechanic. Now, I wasn't going to drive this thing an hour or two to get to a mechanic for my brother just because he had a good relationship with this mechanic. I was willing, as a brother, to follow him in my own vehicle, which I trusted a lot more, and give him a ride back as he was leaving the vehicle with this mechanic for a couple weeks. Now, the way we arranged the travel is he would lead on the highway and I would follow him. About midway through the trip, we needed to stop and fill up. After the fact, as we're getting back on the highway, I'm following my GPS, he's in front of me, and he turns going the wrong way, going the way that we just came. I'm pretty sure it's wrong. I'm pretty sure he's wrong. I don't follow him going the wrong way. I just continue across the bridge and take the on-ramp in the appropriate direction. I immediately call him, and he answers, and I'm like, did you just turn the wrong way? Yes, Jay, I did. It was a very embarrassing moment for him, but he was like, what else can I do? I turned the wrong way. I'm going to drive until I find a way to turn around. And you may know, if you've ever been in a similar situation, this can seriously cost a lot of time for him. And I wasn't willing to stop and wait for him to catch up. I was going to keep on rolling, but it gave me an interesting opportunity because I wanted him to be able to catch up to me without speeding. So I went 5 to 10 miles per hour slower than the speed limit down the Kansas stretch of I-70, which has a speed limit of 75 miles an hour. So I was doing 65 to 70 as he was trying to catch up. What I noticed, however, was that my instantaneous miles per gallon looked like it had significantly improved and my average fuel economy was ticking up. Turns out, driving below the speed limit here was an improvement on how much the trip was costing me. And I wasn't really sacrificing any time because I had to have my brother catch up to me anyway. And this got me thinking on this longer road trip where I had nothing but myself and my quiet thoughts. Can driving below the speed limit actually save you if your travel budget is tight? And conversely, even without a ticket, does speeding cost you more for the same given trip? Well, that is what we're talking about in the main topic. With Thanksgiving practically upon us and Christmas right around the corner, I wanted to focus today's episode on how to save us money while we're traveling over the river and through the woods. And to keep things simple, I want to cover a little bit of an experiment that I did this summer as a result of my little road trip adventure with my brother Jordan. So while I was driving, I was trying to figure out how fast my tachometer was spinning at different speeds. I started by going around 65 miles an hour, and if I'm reading my tachometer correctly, found that I was getting a rotations per minute, an RPM, of about 1,750. Now, a little bit further along, I decide that I'm going to speed up. For this experiment, I'm driving a 2014 Acura MDX, which is rated to get 27 miles per gallon at highway speeds. Now, that's up to 27 miles per gallon at highway speeds. Because the faster you go when you speed up, the tachometer right here has to spin a little bit faster. When I was going 70 miles an hour, I saw that I was getting more like 1900 RPM. so 150 RPM, give or take, more than when I was traveling at just 65 miles an hour. When I speed up to 75 miles per hour, the tachometer ticks just barely above 2000 RPM. I was reading around 2050 RPM. For this clip, the instantaneous miles per gallon is not very reflective of what I'd get over the long term because the road I was driving on had some ups and downs. But the variation that I saw in the tachometer is very likely a stronger indicator of a correlation to improved fuel economy at various speeds. You see, between 60 and 65 miles per hour is when my vehicle was getting an optimal low reading on the tachometer. Any speed above that seemed to simply increase how fast the motor spins. As a motor goes through, or a car engine goes through its typical process of stuffing fuel and air into the cylinder, compressing it, and then igniting it to expand, each stroke of the engine at speed, at power, can be approximately the same, regardless of how fast we're going once we're at speed. We're going to assume that the engine is using the same ideal optimal ratio of air to fuel above 65 miles per hour. With this assumption, for my particular vehicle, we can correlate 1,750 RPM or thereabouts with 27 miles per gallon. And we can know that going from 65 to 70 miles per hour increases my RPM by about 150. In other words, if the speed limit were 70 miles per hour and I drove 65 miles per hour, my engine is going to be rotating around 8% slower than it otherwise would. By extension, if the speed limit was actually 75 miles per hour and I chose to go 65, my engine would be rotating about 14 to 15% slower than it would at 75 miles per hour. And remember, we're assuming that the engine is using the same amount of fuel for each stroke. So by going faster, we're simply putting more strokes per unit time, and our fuel consumption can be directly correlated in this model that I'm using here to the rotation of the engine. This means that if I get the rated 27 miles per gallon at 65 miles per hour and I increase to 70 miles per hour, I am going to be getting roughly 2 to 2.5 miles per gallon less fuel economy than I otherwise would. I'd be getting much closer to 23 miles per gallon, which is oddly enough much closer to my average fuel economy that's been recorded over the time as seen in the clip when I did the experiment. Now, I want to point out that just driving slower is not always going to improve your fuel economy because you have a transmission that can shift to a lower gear once you go slow enough, kicking the RPM up again, and thus reducing your fuel economy because going slower and maintaining that speed is going to require more power when you don't have the same amount of momentum. We can reduce my results down to a simpler rule of thumb, though, and say conservatively, down to 65 miles per hour, wherever your engine is optimized, which is typically between 60 and 65 miles per hour, you're going to be able to approximate an improvement of around 8% or 2 miles per gallon on your fuel economy. That's what I was seeing, conservatively speaking. That means that if you're speeding, you could be spending up to 10% more on your road trip for Thanksgiving and the holidays or just highway driving in general than you otherwise would to try to get there faster and exceeding the legal limit. You're breaking your wallet up to 10%, given my findings here, assuming you're not willing to speed more than 5 miles per hour. Now, let's assume that you're driving on a highway that's very open and you don't have a whole lot of traffic that's pressing you to be at the speed limit. Driving 5 miles per hour slower can save you up to 10% on your travel expense for your fuel consumption. Approximately, if we were to extend my results, is something that you can use as an expectation. If you want to know firm numbers for your vehicle, you'd have to do similar testing. Okay, this is great for the highway driving, but we have some city driving that's going to be involved. Now, I want to point out for my Acura MDX, I get 18 miles per gallon in the city. That's the factory rated fuel economy. Driving in the city, mile per mile, is significantly more expensive than the highway driving. So in many ways, even though this represents a minority of holiday driving, this tip could save you much more and be a more frugal application of changing habits. It's just not as tangible as the reduction of speed on the highway. The Mythbusters are the ones who inspired me to recognize this. They had an episode on their show before they got canceled or moved on, where they were trying to answer the myth: does driving while stressed or driving while angry decrease your fuel economy? Do you burn more fuel if you're driving stressed? So they had their personalities basically cuddle puppies and be relaxed and then drive a 4-mile trek. Then they had them exposed to like their worst fears, take laxatives, be sleep deprived, and then drive the same abandoned 4-mile trek. And what they found is the more aggressive and stressed driving patterns resulted in consuming 1/3 or 33% more fuel than when the same path was driven with the same car by a calm driver. Think about that. You're spending up to 33% more if you're stressed out, if you're in a hurry, if you're in a rush. And this comes down to really an acceleration problem. You see, as you're accelerating in your vehicle, if you're punching it, if you're trying to get up to speed really fast, you have to exert much more energy than if you were to increase your speed slowly over a longer duration. And velocity isn't just a function of your speed. Speed is the absolute value of velocity. A change in velocity can also be a change in direction because velocity is a vector value. It has to come in with a direction. So as you're taking turns, you're actually having to exert more energy to experience a rate of change in your velocity, in your speed through the turn, if you will. As a result, if you turn more aggressively and you accelerate more aggressively, you're going to be burning more fuel than if you were a featherfoot in the city. This is exactly why the one time I was driving with my sister-in-law in the back and I punched it to get on the highway, like I literally threw the car into sport mode. The tachometer went way up. I was burning a bunch more fuel than was necessary, and I accelerated into the highway speed like as fast as I could. She called out from the back, "Fuel economy be darned," because she knows driving more aggressively consumes more fuel, and that's a point of conversation between she and I that I won't get into right now. Anyway, to summarize, if you drive 5 miles below the speed limit or simply avoid speeding, you can reduce your expected travel cost for fuel by up to 10%. That's not a promise, it's an estimation, but it's still a very good bit of advice. You can trade off getting up a little earlier in the morning, spending a little bit more time on the road in order to spend a little bit less at the pump. And if you focus on being a little bit more calm as you're doing that last minute shopping for either Thanksgiving or holiday gifts, you're also going to reduce the pain on your wallet when you're at the pump. Now I want to know what you think, and I want to know, do you have a travel saving tip, specifically when it comes to fuel consumption, that wasn't covered today? What do you think of my results, and do you think that we can extend these as a nice rule of thumb? Had you thought about driving 5 miles per hour faster or slower, resulting in an up to 10% change in your fuel consumption? And until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.